Hi class, welcome back to Writing 201. Today we're going to focus on world building, answering the question, what makes it so complicated? World building is the most complicated part of writing. And I know I've said character many times, but the more I've committed to working on my craft, and the more I've written, and the more I've published, and the more reviews I've gotten, the more I realize that character becomes easier over time, but world building gets harder over time because you try to improve on it all the time. And it's such a layered subject that to try and master it as quickly as you could master a character development, it's just not the same level of complication. Because in world building, you have to understand that in the real world, there are moving parts not just in your life, but in other people's lives all over the world. And what that means is the parts that move for others means that the trajectory of their path and their own life and culture and everything is so different from yours that you can't even fathom what it actually is unless you've actually done the research for it. And that's where the research pairs with world building when you try to create a new world in your fiction. So that's what we're going to start with. We're going to start with moving parts. Okay. So, moving parts. What does that mean exactly? Well, let's focus on what it means for your characters. So, for your characters, moving parts means how the world around them plays a role in where they go and where you want them to go. And that means you have to see how their personality matches with the personality of the world that you created. So the reason why that makes it so complicated to begin with is that you have no idea what your world is capable of doing to your character unless you decide what you want it to do. And deciding what you want the world to do to your character is a hard question to ask. Unless you've spent a lot of time before putting pen to paper understanding the world yourself, meaning you're creating all the layers and understanding what those layers mean, not just for the story, but what it means for your character and options that you have created for yourself to put that character into, what path you want them to go down, and how the path of other characters, whether directly or indirectly related to that character, plays a role in that path, I guess. And also, how does that singularity connect with the world? And how much of that world are we seeing through that character's eyes? And then, not just that, but like, how do you tie in other moving parts of that world to other characters and then somehow make it cohesive to the central characters and the focus of the story? And that's why I could go on about that, but it's such a you won't know really what moving parts means until you actually do it. I can explain it to you vaguely or detailed in a more detailed fashion, but until you actually have the practice to do so, you won't know what it really means. So what I can tell you for the meantime is that, in summary, moving parts is how you plan out your world before you start your story, in the sense of where you want the options to play their role in the story, and how you want to get more specific about it in terms of what it means for your characters and what it means for your overall message or goal for your story. Moving on to endless perspectives of reality. Okay? So what does that mean? I mean the perspectives of each character. So yes, that's more focused on character, but your character's perspective of their own reality is in itself the choice you made after deciding what the moving parts are around them that mirrors what happens in their, not just their surroundings, but what you allow the character to believe to be their reality. Because each character's reality is based on decision making and how the world around them evolves or reacts to them, and vice versa. So not only do you have to be aware of that, we have to be aware of other characters' reality and the perspective of the world around them. And in that respect, you have to understand that the changes around them in their environment and atmosphere will vary from person to person because they will all make different decisions, and therefore altering a different geological change in that character's path. So when you try to tie that change in reality in terms of immediate surroundings of each character, then it becomes a question of how do all these realities melt into one, or at least feed into one through line that makes the story not so chaotic and hard to understand, where you have these different paths, but that you somehow try to not make the scenes so jarring, so that if you're doing multiple POV, there's still this sort of like needle and thread that somehow ties them all together. Because you can have a character in each chapter be in a different part of the world that you created, but there's still some kind of singularity that brings them together so that it's not so jarring. We still get a variety, but we're not jostled from one pivot to the next. Okay? Next is cultures. So for cultures, this is where you have to be a little more sensitive. Okay? And what I mean by sensitive is that whatever cultures you include in your story, you have to understand that your perspective and your understanding and whatever research you do is going to have a certain level of effect on the reader. And what I mean by that is, if you were to include an indigenous character and you are not indigenous, you have to be very careful with how that character is coming off the page and how you present their cultural ties. And what does that mean for the reader? What does it mean for you? What does it mean for the story? Does it matter? Is it primary, secondary, or in the background? So when it comes to including culture, you have to really pay attention to what purpose it has in your story. And that's why it's a bit complicated when it comes to world building, because if you aren't careful about the role you want culture to play in your storytelling, you're going to get backlash. So just take your time when it comes to including culture. Talk to people of that culture. Ask them what they would find offensive or inoffensive, what's okay, what's not okay. Because if you just do a bunch of text block research, it's not enough, because that's just information, not human accuracy. That's the most important part to me, is for cultural aspects, is the human aspect. How do humans of that culture see the importance of that culture, and do they want to see that in a book? And that's where you have to be brave, but at the same time you still have to be self-aware of what you're doing. Simple as that. Well, not simple, but that's basically the gist of it. Okay, next. Classes. So for classes, what I mean by that is levels of money, of someone's income. So it's not just about money. It's also the cultural aspect too. Is the person who's rich coming from old or new money? Is it a mogul, someone that became rich through hard work, or did they have a large inheritance? And then on the flip side, poverty. Did someone go from being rich to poor? And how did that happen? There's all these webs in all these levels of not just money but fame, because with richness comes connections and fame and the wrong kind of attention, shady deals, I guess. I don't know how not everyone that's rich is, clean. So the reason why I included that in the question, what makes world building complicated, is that when it comes to classes, you have to decide what is your idea of rich or poor or middle class, and how does that fit into your world, and how does that look? What kind of clothes do they wear? Where do they live? What kind of building or street, or are they in a busy city or town? Are they an ant, or do they live on the countryside and there's still rich people there? There's so many things you have to include when it comes to class. And if you have more questions about that, go ahead. But there's not much else I can say there. Next, stability and instability in societies. Okay. So, this is more of a question of which societies you decide to put on the forefront and on the back burner. On the forefront is what you deem to be necessary for the reader to understand in terms of level of effect. So, what's so complicated about that is deciding the positive or negative moving of the story when it comes to society. So if you have a stable society, that means that part of the world that you've created has no conflict. Instability is where there's corruption. So when there's corruption in governance, that's where instability comes into society, because then there's discrepancy towards what is right or wrong, and who likes or trusts their government or not, and who's involved in that government. How does that affect society's decision making? Are they going to revolt? Are they going to hide? Are they going to fight? I don't know. And that's what I mean by deciding what kind of society you've created and how many sub-societies do you have, and what do those smaller groups do for the story. So that's why it's complicated, because you don't know until you've fleshed them out what that means for the story. Pretty simple. Second to that, publication of societies. That's a bit weird. But what does that mean? To me, publication of society doesn't mean like for books, but how public. How public is that society? So, comparative to instability and stability of society, the level of publicity you give to your societies is a matter of what kind of society is it? Is it a cult? Is it just society in general where everyone's kind of just going about their day? Or is it something a bit more layered than that? So that's where you decide which societies do you want to remain public. Do you want to have secret societies? Is that just not your thing, or is it your thing? And even then, if you'd like to do that more than once, of secret societies, you still have to find different different levels of secrecy. And how does that tie into governance or media? All these things that have a very public, not just image, but public effect. Moving on. I'm flying through this because there's so much and I can't teach everything in one video. Next is geography. So what I mean by geography that makes world building complicated is that even if you have a good grasp of the world's geography, you need to have a good grasp of your world's geography, because you need to understand, where does your world stand? As in, is it in a mirror world of ours? Is it exactly like ours? Is it completely fictionalized, where now you have to figure out what kind of other places there are, whether country, continent, or even just pieces of land on an alien planet? That's where you have to ask yourself, what kind of geography am I creating here? What exactly is the richness of this planet's resources? And what is the structure and the integrity of the lands that I've created? Is it purely water-based? Is it all sand? Is it land? Is it all mountains? I don't know. You have to really ask yourself those questions, because without understanding how your world is painted, it's just going to be a blurry mess. So ask yourself that question before you start writing. Next, we've already talked about this in the previous world building video, structure. So for structure, why it's complicated is because, like I was saying about geography, if you don't understand the structure of what you're creating, you don't have a clear visual of what it is, it's really hard to communicate that to your reader of what the structure looks like. For example, in the book I'm working on now, Black Rose Cocoon, it's my first hand at picturing Halberton City. So that's why once I finish my other project, I'll be going back into that city and doing 2 more books so that I can explore 2 more ways or 2 more angles of that world. Because even now, I only have a visual of some parts of it, because the city is too vast for me to pack that all into one book. I'm only focusing on the parts that matter most to the story. And that's why understanding structure bit of a dry throat, I'm so sorry. Understanding structure means understanding physically where your characters need to be for the story itself. And if the structure that you've created for that world is interesting to you, and you want to see what else there is to that land, then that's when you ask yourself, well, is there more to say about this world beyond this book? Okay. Lastly, hopefully I won't be coughing again for the last part. Where do we fit in? Or the character? That's what's so hard to understand, because understanding your character's role in the world is really you asking, what role does your character play in the evolution of this world? So really, you're trying to picture, or trying to put a bow, I guess, towards the end of the story, on how that character came to be and how they had an effect in that world. And that's what I mean by where did they fit in. What did they do in terms of their decision making to cause the world to evolve the way it did? That's really the way you're trying to answer it. It's not easy, really. I mean, I've been racking my brain on the second half of my story, because I don't want it to feel too jarring. And it's just going well. It's going fine. But that's why taking your time with the first draft, and not thinking too much, obviously, but taking the time to see where the first idea for each step of your story should go. And then when you revise, that's when you start asking, where do these characters fit in? What exactly is their role for this story? And if the first draft that I did, the first version of where they ended up taking a path, how did that affect the world around them? And is where I fit them in the proper place, the proper role? And did the way I evolve the world and everything in it, was that right? Does that make sense? Because it's never truly clear in the first draft if what you did was right, because you're still new to that world, especially if it's like the first book of a series or a standalone novel. Did I do the right thing? Did I create the right world? Did I take the right steps as the chapters went along to get it to where it ended up? And if it's not, then that's when you start to ask all these questions. Now, I'm not saying I gave you solutions today. I just did my best to kind of unpack the whole what makes world building so complicated. I don't know if I'm going to do another video about world building, but I thought this as another level of understanding world building is necessary for you to understand. Because without asking those questions for why it's so complicated, then you're just going to go through the motions, and I don't want you to do that, and I don't want to either. So I hope that all of this was not only entertaining but educational, and that it has created some necessary questions for you, and that you're able to answer them. If you can't answer them, then please come and ask me, and I'll be happy to answer them. Okay? Alright. Happy reading, have a good day, and hopefully it is not too terrible where you are weather-wise, and that your life is good, and I hope to see you in the next class. Have a good day now.